Okay, I am back. Chapter 8 from Summer with the Marine, and this is Ford. When Ford's lips found Eisley's, they didn't want to leave. Maybe they didn't have to. Perhaps they could make it work. He could tell her everything and risk her response. Her fingers caressed the back of his neck, and her mouth pressed firmly against his, holding him there in that moment, on the beach and under the moon. He didn't have to think about risks or forever. They had right then. He got lost there as he breathed in her summery sunshine scent. That's all he needed. He was sure he stopped breathing. They floated in space where time and distance and the past and future didn't matter. They didn't need any of that. They only needed each other. He gripped her tight, a promise never to let go again. She returned his squeeze as their hearts beat in sync. Their lips crashed and collided and explored new frontiers that were a step beyond the friendship he'd always treasured. All that mattered were her demanding lips, her soft cheeks, her warm nose, her lidded eyes. He smoothed his hands down her back, along her arms into her hands, taking account of the terrain of Eisley. He was prepared to plant a flag and declare the land his own. He got lost in the new place and the rush of warmth and desire between them until she smiled against his mouth. They pulled back. Seeing her smile was like a present, a gift. It lit her up and made him certain there was no one he'd rather have in his life. She was the sun, the center of it all. She bit her lip. That was even better than I imagined. Does that mean you fantasized about us kissing, he asked. Only 1,000 times, at least, she said, echoing his comment about he'd wanted to ask her on a date so many times. Still seated in the sand, he drew her against his side. She looked up at him, really looked at him in a way that made him feel vulnerable. But he could open up with her. He wanted to tell her everything that happened after the divorce. She lifted her finger and gently traced the scar running from the outside of his eyebrow and down his cheek. She lifted her lips to the spot and gently kissed the scar. There's a saying, a quote that goes something like, "The wound is where the light enters you." "You're my light, Eisley." Ford's voice was low and scratchy like the sand. Her smile faltered like she wasn't sure whether to smile or if a deeper, more powerful emotion was threatening to push through. "Does it hurt?" she asked after a beat. He lifted his hand and cupped it around hers, then drew it to his chest. "The worst pain I ever experienced was here, when I thought I'd lost you." "You left me, Ford." "I'm sorry. Please forgive me," he said, scrubbing his hand down his face. Her hand landed on his arm, and her fingers then traced the tattoo of the marine symbols of the eagle, globe, and anchor. Underneath was a banner with the words Semper Fidelis. He explained their meaning and then tugged up his other sleeve, revealing another tattoo. She angled to see the compass drawn in ink. "It's tilted. Why does north point that way?" she said, gesturing to the way it was directed at his other arm. "It points toward the Marine's tattoo. It's my true north, but so are you. I was lost for a long time, Eisley. I got the Marine's tattoo first, but then this one more recently. It was like I was trying to find my way. Strange how it led me to you." "Fate? Destiny? Coincidence?" she asked. He lifted and lowered his shoulder. "Semper Fi means always loyal. I'll always be a Marine and belong to that brotherhood. But I'll also be loyal to you, Eisley, whether that's as a friend or—" Her eyes softened. He went on, "Or if that might mean something more, something I always wanted but was never man enough to own." The moonlight caught the sparkle in her honey-brown eyes as they turned liquid. "Did I say something wrong?" he asked, regretting making her cry. She sniffled and shook her head. "It's just not something I ever expected to hear. We could try to make this work, you and me." Hope rose up inside him, a bright, powerful feeling he had only experienced when he was out from enemy lines and safely back home. No, that wasn't true. That was more like relief. The feeling surging through him wasn't just gratitude for being alive, but for the beginning of making a life with Eisley, the beautiful woman before him, the woman he'd survived the war and worse for, the woman he loved. He took her hands and squeezed, his eyes locking on hers. He'd tell her how he felt. He'd never spoken the words to a woman before, not even his ex-wife. He shoved away the memory, the hasty, desperate decision he'd made to anchor himself to life back home, to give him a reason to live. When all along the reason dwelled in him, it was the love he felt and shared with Eisley. He was sure of it. They were on the same wavelength. He started to speak, and so did she. His lips quirked. "You go first." She cleared her throat. "I love yodeling." She spread her arms wide, as though revealing a vista with rolling hills. Ford smirked. "You do now? Let's hear you yodel." "Oh, I need to be in Austria to yodel," she said. "Have you ever been to Austria?" "Well, no, but the hills there seem to be perfect for yodeling." Ford tossed his head back with laughter. She threw him a sharp, scolding look. "Yodeling is no laughing matter." "I'll be the judge of that when I actually hear you yodel." "Fine. Well, the truth is I love yoga." She went still. "Yoga?" he asked. "I've been to yoga classes. Watch me do downward dog." He moved through the sequence his counselor had insisted would help him find a greater sense of self-awareness and peace. It had worked. He shifted into warrior next. "Come on, Yogini. Join me if you love yoga so much." "Oh, it's probably not a good idea on the sand." "There's a beach yoga class here on Monday mornings." That was mostly true. Ford had connected with a veteran who also practiced yoga, and they'd met up once, which had mostly turned into a long conversation about being in the service. She tugged him back to the sand. Okay. She closed her eyes. I love yogurt. I thought you were more of an ice cream kind of girl. Yes, you got me there. She hardly met his eyes. Speaking of that, do you think we could go sneak some dessert? He winked at her. She gripped his arm as though she was intent on going through all the words, starting with the letter Y, until she landed on the one that she wanted. He was willing to wait. She was worth it. But the ice cream also sounded good. He smirked. Their eyes met and held, dissolving uncertainty, at least at that moment. Ford Armstrong, I love you. Eisley Higgins, I have loved you as long as I've known you. Yet somehow I love you more today than ever, which only tells me one thing. I'll love you even more the next day, and the one after that, and so on. She gripped his t-shirt, tugging him close. Her mouth lifted in a smile, and as their eyes locked again, his lips captured hers, and they kissed with the moon shining above, bathing them in milky light. Okay, that chapter was short but sweet. That was chapter 8, and we are moving on to chapter 9 as I go through Summer with the Marine. So I'm going to save this, download it, and you can watch it in my IG stories and join me for the next live.